Good morning. Welcome to the Glendale City Council Budget Workshop session of February 16, 2021. The meeting is called to order. I will now conduct an attendance roll call. Please signify by saying present. Councilmember Aldama. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Malnar.
Present.
Councilmember Tomacha.
Here.
Councilmember Turner.
Present.
I'm here, and Mayor Wires is excused. Ms. Bauer, will you please introduce item 1?
Fiscal year 21-22 budget workshop.
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Here to lead off today's workshop number 2 on CIP. We'll turn it over to Lisette Camacho, our Director of Budget and Finance.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Today is our second budget workshop on capital improvement plan. It's also the second budget workshop on general obligation bond-funded capital projects. The first item on our agenda is to go through the follow-up items from the February 2nd budget workshop. Then we'll go through the projects for general obligation bond-funded, projects for parks and recreation, cultural facility, open space and trails, and general government. Then at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up for council feedback and questions. Before we move on to the presentation, I just want to make sure that City Council has the correct draft CIP binders with them. And if you could take out your binders, if you look at the tab under Airport, the first document that you should see is a change document. Does everyone have that change document and the correct binders? Okay, it looks like everyone has the correct binders. As I said, today is the second budget workshop on capital improvement plan and also the second budget workshop on GO bond-funded capital projects. On February 4th, we sent electronically to the City Council the updated budget calendar, the yellow worksheet, and a report on the growth in property tax valuation. On February 10th, we sent an electronic copy of the updated CIP binders, as well as new binders for the City Council that included the estimated carryover and the project change summary document. We also had a follow-up item on the economic development ballot language. This ballot language was approved by the voters in the 1999 election. The remaining voter authorization is about 22 million, and the bonds could be issued for promoting new private sector job creation through development and redevelopment within the city of Glendale, including land acquisition to be used for public or private partnerships, constructing infrastructure for future business parks, and acquiring land and interest therein as may be needed for such purposes. The next follow-up item we had was on the food tax, or food for home consumption. The tax rate for food tax is 2.5%. 1.9% goes to the general fund, 0.1% goes to public safety for police and fire, and 0.5% goes to transportation. Each 0.1% of tax is generating approximately $658,000 in revenues. A reduction of 0.1% would equal $1 for $100,000 in food purchases. And food purchased by food stamps, or EBT, are exempt from the tax. We are proposing a new change moving forward with the budget process, which is on this slide. We will be presenting and discussing sales tax annually when we present the 5-year forecast, similar to what we do with the secondary and primary property tax. So when we do the 5-year forecast, we'll provide City Council information on the major business categories like retail sales, food for home consumption, restaurant and bars, construction, retail sales over 5,000, amusement and hotel and motel. As you can see in the middle column here, you have the tax rates, and then we also have the 0.1% of revenue generated by the various business categories.
Vice Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Let's set Ms. Camacho a question for you on the follow-up items. What is your the intent is clear for the sales tax, but for the food tax, what is your intent on having discussion with council on that item? Is that you're just showing it to us today and we're going to discuss it later, or is that open for discussion today?
Mayor, members of the council, council requested information on the 0.1% of the food tax and how much revenue it's generating, which we provided here on this slide. I believe council will have discussion on the food tax itself, but it's, up to council on the discussion and the feedback.
So I don't want to take over the meeting, but was your intent to have a discussion later, or are you just open to do it now?
Mayor, members of the council, that's at your discretion to
Okay.
go ahead and do that. If you'd like to do that, this would be a fine place to do it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you bringing the follow-up items. And Vice Mayor, if I may
ahead.
continue. Thank you for bringing this back. This looks a lot different than one would expect. So an individual would save $1 per $1,000 in food purchase. That doesn't seem like a big impact to a family or an individual. But holistically, as citizens, they see a $658,000 revenue reduction in the city budget as a whole. So that looks enticing. So I'd like to ask my fellow council members what their thought is in reducing it now, changing that to half of that. Do we do it later? And rather looking at the dollar you save per thousand is the lump sum of 658 from the total budget. Vice Mayor, I'll yield to hopefully members of the council will chime in.
Okay. Anyone else right now? Member Tomachoff?
Thank you. I'll speak up. I'm open to having the discussion, but I think probably we need to have a better idea. We haven't even seen the budget yet. So until we've actually looked at the budget, I would prefer to wait and see where we are. I want to look at the whole picture before we have that discussion. At least I'd be more comfortable myself doing it that way. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
I would agree with that sentiment, that I think we need to see if we decide to move forward and reduce the sales tax by, say, a 0.1%, and then we do it again maybe later, that we know where that money is going to be coming from. In other words, we're reducing our budget by $658,000, and there's the general fund gets the bulk of that, but so do some of the other areas. And so I think we need to kind of know, maybe we can decide it now that we would like to move forward with that discussion and have staff provide us some scenarios of where that money would come from if we decide to move in that direction. Because I think that's critical where we're going to cut budget in order to accomplish the cut in the sales tax.
Thank you. Anyone else right now? Yes.
I do have a question on the food tax, specifically on slide 6. Is that how it's allocated? You show 1%, 1.9% to the general fund, 0.1% to public safety, and 0.5% to transportation. That's how the food tax is allocated within the budget? Is that what that slide is showing us? Or that's...
Mayor, members of the council, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Yes, that is correct. Out of the 2.5%, 1.9% goes to the general fund, 0.1% goes to public safety, and the 0.5% goes to the transportation.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor,
Yes. Councilmember Clark?
following up on that, if we were to decide to reduce by 0.1, could we direct that it be reduced only in general fund? Or yeah, that's my question.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, yes, I believe it would only be on the general fund, the 1.9%, because the 0.1% and the 0.5% for public safety and transportation were approved by the voters.
Very good, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Yeah, and I concur with the council members who spoke with regard to at the appropriate time for the discussion. So I would ask City Manager if you would get with your staff and find out at which point is it appropriate where we see a much larger picture of where the dollars are coming from and how it impacts the budget, but also impacts the citizens. So, but in this budget season, but just at what time so we don't pass it? Does that make sense?
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Ready? Go ahead and move forward.
The next slide is what's in your book. So what I'll do is just go through the binders that you have. I wanted to point out that the CIP Summary by Project tab is the first tab that you'll see, and that's on page 1. So what you'll see on this tab is that you have the project name. So you have it by the various project type, airport, arts, drainage. Then you see a column for the carryover and then the budget for fiscal year 22, 23, and so on for the 10-year CIP. The next thing that you have is the CIP Summary by Funding Source, and that is your second tab, and it's on page 3. And what you'll see in this worksheet is that you have the funding sources. For example, the general government capital projects, that's the pay-as-you-go. Then you have HERF, transportation grants. Then you also have Arts Commission, other grants. And very similar to the last tab, you'll have the carryover estimates, and then you'll have the budget for fiscal year 22, 23, and so on for the 10-year CIP. Then after these 2 tabs, you'll have various tabs by the project type. So you have airport, arts, drainage, facility maintenance. I will point out and have you look at parks. So if you open up the parks tab, the first thing you'll see is a summary of project changes. The very first column is the project number. The fund and the fund names are your funding sources. And then you have the project name. So the first one is Parks Master Plan Update. Then you have a column for budget change. So for this project, there wasn't any change to the budget, no change at all to the project. So you'll see in the change column, no change, and there's no explanation for the change. But if you go to the middle of the page, this specific project, Rose Lane Park Improvements, it is one of the projects that we'll be discussing today. It's bond funded. The budget change, it increased by $970,000, and it is a new project. And you see in the explanation of the change, in the fiscal year 21 CIP, we had a large placeholder budget for ground and irrigation, and now we've broken that budget out and identified specific projects for parks. So after the project changes, you'll see a summary on page 99. Summary by project. So you'll see the first column as, again, the project number, and you'll see the project name, and then very similar to the summary pages that we saw, you have a carryover, then the project budget for fiscal year 22, 23, and so on. And again, you'll have a summary by funding source, and that's on page 109. I'm sorry, 104, I believe. 103, sorry. So then you'll see the funding source. Then you have the parks construction. The second one is what we'll be discussing today. That's Fund 4050. You have the carryover. And then the budgets for fiscal year 22, 23, and so on for the 10-year CIP. And beginning on page 104 is where you'll see the specific details for each project. So what you see in here is the Parks Master Plan update. You'll have a project description, project justification. And this one, you see the category, the very first column. This one has carryover only, and it doesn't have any budgets for additional funding for fiscal year 22 and 23. It's just carryover from the prior year.
Yes, Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you here if I could on park summary by funding source. Where's the Glen Lakes money being included in the budget? Is it general government capital? Is that all bond? What we have left in general obligation bond capacity? I'm just curious where I know we had multiple conversations about the Glen Lakes money being directed through citywide parks, so I just want to know how to identify it in here.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, there's no specific projects for Glen Lakes. So the proceeds for Glen Lakes, I'm assuming for the sale of Glen Lakes, that went into general fund, and the projects have not yet been identified, but the proceeds did come in. So it would be considered as pay-as-you-go as we go through discussions on how, the proceeds will be used.
Okay, but how do I identify pay-as-you-go on page 103 then?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, the Fund 1080 is your pay-as-you-go.
Vice Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
members of the council, it's the first line of that page where it says general government, 1080 general government capital projects. That's pay-as-you-go capital.
Okay, I guess I can wait for the rest of the questions till we get to parks. How much do you know off the top of your head? That's carried over? It shows as a carryover.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, that carryover are the projects that have been identified for the fund balance strategy, in which we funded various projects in parks, including the community services. So they will be broken out in the projects here, and Mr. Burke will be going through each individual project, and we can point that out as he goes through the presentation.
Okay, Vice Mayor, if I could, I'm still a little confused though, because you said projects hadn't been identified for the proceeds of the Glen Lake sale, and then you just said that these are carryover for parks projects that had been identified. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, has there been an infusion in capital projects for parks, various parks projects that are a result of the proceeds of the sale of Glen Lakes?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Talmadge, we just recorded the sale of Glen Lakes into general fund. It's then reflected in the general fund unreserved fund balance. We had that discussion then in last fourth quarter about strategies of what to do with it. So it doesn't go towards bond obligation. It was just really revenue that came in. What we've had the discussion is from a policy level that you should, it's always a good practice to use one-time revenues for one-time capital versus using one-time revenue for ongoing expenses, because then eventually you have to figure out a way to figure the ongoing nature of it. So it was just recorded when you received the 27.8 million, I think roughly, excess fund balance over the 50 million goal the council has. That reflected the revenues from the sale of Glen Lakes. Or do we actually record it then? Is that correct?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Phelps, it was recorded this fiscal year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So it wasn't in that ending balance from last year, but it was recorded during this year.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So I understand all that, but what I'm trying to identify is, I think the council made it clear that it was our intention to take that money and reinvest it in parks. And I mean, a lot of this stuff, I think that fits the description of capital investment over 50,000 and a life of 10 years or longer, of playground equipment and things like that, we all have a lot of needs within our district that we can identify. So I guess what I want to know is that $6.5 million, was it included in what you're going to be presenting to us in capital investments in our parks? That's what I want to know.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tomalchoff, can you give us a moment to just discuss this amongst ourselves? Thank you, I'm sorry
Okay.
for taking the extra time, but we want to get this right. So it's my understanding that when we did the fund balance discussion, it was in anticipation of the sale of Glen Lakes, and so the pay-as-you-go capital does include that, but we will look into that, make sure that that's correct, and get back to you on that.
And with that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Lindsay.
Vice Mayor, members of the council. For the presentation today, we will be going over the overview of the General Obligation Bond CIP. The slides for these include projects that have previously been in the CIP and that are within existing bond authority. They also have staff recommended projects that are within existing bond authority, and then additionally, staff recommended projects that are outside of existing bond authority, which would require another bond election. At the end of the presentation, we will be able to discuss prioritizing the projects through use of the yellow worksheet, which was sent to you last week, I believe. Again, capacity refers to the amount of debt we can issue while keeping the secondary property tax levy flat. And authorization refers to voter authorization to issue the debt. And then we will also look for council consensus on projects.
Yes, Councilmember Clark.
This is a good time to ask this question. How much debt capacity do we have within this budget? The budget we are currently reviewing. How much is the total amount of debt capacity?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, give us just a second and we'll look that up and give you that information.
And then while you're looking that up, please tell me if all of that debt capacity has been expended by staff suggested or recommended projects, either previously approved or submitted within this year's budget. What I'm trying to find out is there any debt capacity left should a council member want to suggest a project to be included this year, in this year's budget, or if council consensus wants to move a project up that's listed in the CIP, but maybe in an out year, is there any capacity left so that council might do so?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, for fiscal year '22, we have capacity to issue debt of about 30 million while keeping the levy flat.
Okay.
Um,
And how much is suggested of that 30 million within this budget? Is either previously approved or suggested for this year?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, let us get back to you with that information.
Okay, because I think that's critical for this council to know. Do we have the ability to suggest anything? Because the usual answer we get is, okay, you can move something up, but you're going to have to bump something else back. So I would like to know that staff reserved a little bit of debt capacity for city council's use in making suggestions. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, if I may, what would be helpful, I think, for the staff is if there are those kinds of requests to move things up and or move things back, if council would let us know, and then we can do that analysis. Every one of these movements of a project, depending on its funding source, depending on the amount of bond authority, and depending on a number of other factors, may or may not be able to move because of
But Ms.
effects
Rios,
that go on down the line after that. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, we have an extra 5 million here or there. It requires analysis on our part. And so there may be some capacity, and if there are projects that council would like to move forward, we could look at that for you and give you that analysis.
Ms. Rios, I'm not talking about just moving projects forward. I'm talking about if there is an introduction of a new project previously not listed on the CIP. Do I have one? No. But it would be nice to know, even though we don't know what the funding source is at this point, if there is any debt capacity remaining for council to consider. Then, if we know that, and if any of us have projects we'd like to introduce, then you can do that analysis and say, yes, it's possible, or no, it's not possible. But at least give us a number to allow us to think about it and see if there's anything out there that we consider critical enough to add to the CIP. I understand about the moving up. You move something up, something else gets bumped back. But I would like to know and be reassured that all of this 30 million debt capacity, no matter what the funding source at this point, was not consumed in projects recommended by staff, that there was some debt capacity left. That's where I'm headed. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Tomachoff.
If I could, just to add on to what Councilmember Clark just said, and I understand your issue, but our issue as an elected body is these discussions have to be had in public. So it has to be included somewhere in a workshop early enough for us to have an opportunity to weigh in. We can't have these discussions in any other format. So with the open meeting law, this is the format where these discussions have to happen. So, I guess going forward, they need to be included, an opportunity for that included early on, if that's what works better for you. But we can't have these discussions among ourselves. It has to be in a public meeting. Thank you.
Okay, can we proceed?
This pie chart represents the draft 10-year CIP by funding source. This chart has changed slightly from when you saw it back on February 2nd. The draft carryover is now included as part of this chart. Today we will be discussing the general obligation bond portion of the draft CIP. As you can see in this slide, this just indicates what we're going to be discussing today. And again, it's parks and recreation, cultural facility, open space and trails, and government facilities. Pay-as-you-go, which is $158 million and 13% of the budget. Transportation sales tax at 124.6 and 10% of the budget. HERF, 50 million. Development impact fees at 30 million and grants at 27.5 million. Those are part of the budget workshop that we're going to have on March 2nd. And then enterprise funds, which are the largest portion of the CIP at 485 million, or 38% of the CIP, will be discussed on the meeting on March 16th. This slide represents the existing GO bond voter authorization by category. The 4 categories that we are discussing today are highlighted on this slide. You will see an ordinance for the General Obligation Series 2021 bond issuance that is going to come before you on the February 23rd voting meeting. And with that, we'll start going into the Parks and Recreation General Obligation Fund CIP projects. The Parks and Recreation voter authorization has a remaining voter authorization of about 14.3 million. It was approved in 2007, and projects that qualify for Parks and Recreation bonds are for planning and constructing new parks and recreation facilities citywide, and further including but not limited to new swimming pools and indoor and outdoor multi-sport recreation centers, planning, constructing, adding to, and renovating existing parks and recreation buildings and facilities, furnishing and equipping such buildings and facilities and improving the grounds thereof, and acquiring land and interest therein as may be necessary for such facilities and purposes. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, members of the council. So this has been a couple of years in preparation to bring you this presentation today. We've done a lot of analysis of the park system, inventory, assessment. We've used consultants. We've used our own staff. We've been out to all the facilities. My playground inspectors went through every playground in the system and evaluated them, made recommendations. And then we tried to build a program that does a couple of the following things. Addresses some of the major parks in every part of the city. Addresses the oldest parks in the city. So you'll see there's a lot of parks in this plan. We were trying to get the oldest facilities touched early on, or through this 5-year plan. It is not every single thing that every park needs in the city of Glendale. This is trying to hit some of the highest priorities. We have 30 plus new projects. 28 of them are lighting, new lighting to get to the LED lights, which we think will freshen up and make the parks feel a lot safer and a lot newer. 6 irrigation projects to update the irrigation systems. And then a number of projects that we think will, over the next 5 years, involve the council and the community in a lot of ribbon cutting opportunities, including 19 court refurbishings at 10 parks and 40 playgrounds at 24 parks. I think we need to go back one, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this program is already, for Heroes Lake, has already been approved by the council, the $4.2 million, and is within the existing authority. Next. So fiscal 22 and 23, there's a number of projects that are listed here for almost $2.8 million. These are new projects that we're bringing to your attention, and this, go ahead. And then 24 and 25, the list continues, and we'll go through these individually here in a moment, for $3.5 million. And then 26 through 31, an additional $1.8 million of new projects, for a total of $8 million of new projects.
Vice Mayor,
Yes, council member.
I do have one question. According to the Parks Master Plan assessment, which we've never seen, by the way, I would certainly love to have a copy of it, and I'm sure other council members would as well. Apparently, there's nothing in the Yucca District that needed anything? There's no park in the Yucca District?
Mayor, or Vice Mayor, members of council, there are projects in the Yucca District in the total CIP. Again, this is just the general obligation bonds. The Park Master Plan, I believe we presented the findings report to the council last fall. I have the final draft on my desk. We'll be reviewing it with the manager this week and scheduling a workshop with you in the very near term to show you the final recommended plan.
Okay. Just an FYI, it might have been helpful to see the final version of the master plan before we reviewed all this. It's like putting the cart before the horse. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Vice
Go ahead,
Mayor. I
Lauren.
just have a quick question, Mr. Burke. So is the prioritization of these projects based on the Parks Master Plan? The
It
draft?
is in part. It's also based on our assessments and our staff evaluations, and combined all those and then tried to make a distributed end result plan that gets all across the city and gets a number of park projects.
Would it be possible to have these, like, use our GIS and program? I'd love to have a slide that maps these and shows me where they are. So, at least maybe in the future or something, because I don't know where all these parks are, and if I have to look them up one at a time, then I'm not paying attention. So, I think it'd be helpful for all of us to know exactly where in the city all of these parks are. Thank you.
That's a great suggestion. We'll work on being able to do that in the near future. As I go through the individual detail sheets, I'll mention for you which council district they are, because I know you won't know all of them that aren't just in your district or the one immediately adjacent to you, if that helps. And then this group of projects they're all new projects. You can see that the infrastructure one is still that large item that was held from last year, the $40 million. We haven't detailed out those projects yet. And the original build-out for Heroes, which is in the out years, and the Sierra Verde Park improvements, these would all require council approval and additional voter authorization.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, council member.
This is an item that I brought up the other day that I still would like council to consider. We know that Heroes Regional Park build-out is in the last 5 years, and literally, it could be done after I'm dead. I'm serious about that. What I would like to see happen, knowing that it's in the out years and it's unfunded, is there is still the issue of Heroes Park Library expansion. If there is any, and that's one of the reasons why I asked if there was any additional debt capacity that council could consider, is I would like to see somehow or another funding an expansion so we can get a community meeting room that's larger at the Heroes Park Library sometime within the next 5 years.
Yes.
For being annoying, but we do have a lot of questions. Do you have, or could you send us a breakdown? I mean, Heroes Park build-out, part of that is a community center, part of that, there's a lot of things in that $46 million that are a lot of, so, and I understand the need for more meeting space in the Yucca, but I hate to spend money expanding the library. Maybe if we knew how much the community center part of it was, we could move that up instead. And not, I mean, we don't have to move up the whole $46 million to get a community center, I guess is my point. So
Right.
maybe if we could have a little bit more detail there, we might be able to find a way to move that up.
Vice Mayor,
If the
members of
council members
council.
are agreeable to that anyway.
I do have a breakdown, a very high level, of the three major elements of that completion of the park is the community center, the aquatics complex, and then the general park development, the remainder of that park. We'll put that together and get it to you all to consider.
Vice Mayor?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So similar to Councilmember Tomachov's comment, I would hope that staff would bring back data that supports a larger space, not just in the Yucca District, as Ms. Clark is asking for, but if we were to ask that anywhere else. So if you have data that supports that there's a need for a larger space for a community center, then you bring that as well. So that'll help us make that decision whether or not we need to move it up or add more dollars to that project to create a larger space, please. Thank you, sir.
Vice Mayor, I would like to at least partially respond to Councilmember Aldama. There have been, for example, children's events at Heroes where moms and kids have had to be turned away because the one meeting room that has a maximum capacity of 30 people, that's all we've got, was filled. So I do know that library staff has had to turn moms and kids away because the room was already filled. I attempted to have one meeting in that room. I had 60 residents. They wouldn't fit. We had to move it outside. And that's the problem, that there's only one meeting room. Its occupancy is 30 persons, and it's just not large enough. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Turner?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I was thinking along the same lines as Councilmember Aldama about maybe if we could have some data that showed demand and how much the rooms are used in other libraries, and also maybe a sense of what the community center, is it just additional meeting rooms we're looking at, or are there, we're looking at other equipment that we should be considering as well in this. We have to consider how often a space is going to be used, as well as, that when we try to prioritize this and make sure that we're meeting the most frequent demands, not just the largest demands. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Who said that? Go ahead.
The masked man here. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Clark, thank you for responding to that. I feel that the data, when it does come back, would actually support your request, and therefore we would probably have more space than you need. But I think that it'll help me as an individual support that ask if the data comes back and suggests that we need it. And if it does it, then it also supports us in the reason why we don't. The problem with the Yucca District is it's aged, but it doesn't have a lot of community centers. For example, I choose O'Neill Park, I choose the community center on Ocotillo or the library. So there's a lot of areas I can choose from to have meetings. Yours has become a hub. The Heroes Park has become a hub for that. So I think it's great to be able to use that space. But I'm not suggesting that we don't do it, and I'm not asking for the data to support not doing it. More of if it's needed, then yeah, let's do it. I just want to be clear about that. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor, I would also in response say that is the only meeting space within the Yucca District. And our population has doubled since 2010, and that's it. We have no other meeting space unless you want to rent out space at a local school. Thank you.
Councilmember Turner?
Okay, to be brief, that's what I was going to say that I do in my district a lot of times is I just collaborate with the local school and use the larger spaces that they have available. And oftentimes that's even more convenient for the residents for local issues and gives me a chance to move, like my district meeting, for instance, around the district, and as opposed to having it in one location. But we should look at this holistically and make the decision. Thank you.
Yeah. City Manager?
Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council. So currently in your 5-year plan, there is no project that's been identified to expand the Heroes Park Library. Hasn't been scoped out, hasn't been researched in terms of need, because the CIP is your plan. So when we say how much can we move something up, first question would be how much should we set aside? We've not scoped it. Is it a 2,000 square foot room addition? Is it a 10,000 square foot addition? So we don't have a project, and we haven't even done the work on the needs assessment, because what we're working on are the things within your CIP. That's what our direction is to put our energy into. So what I would recommend would be this: the appropriate place to do it would be to give indication during this process that somewhere within either the first 5 years, the first 3 years, the first 10 years, or the 10 years of your CIP, we'd like to see what a project would look like to expand the library. Then we can start working on the local need and try to come up with a budget on it. But we haven't been given direction to do that. And then what we'll have to do is when we slot that in there, we'll need to figure out what gets pushed out or what can be scoped downward to free up the available capacity. So it's not that we don't want to do an expansion of the Heroes Park Library. We haven't really been given direction as a staff to work on it. Given that direction, we'll be glad to scope that out and to look for ways that we could finance that, which is what our job is to do, is to kind of come up with a financing plan that meets the priorities and the the decisions that the council makes.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. That was the reason why, I mean, I don't know that we've actually said an expansion of the library, and I mean, I don't think we, at least my opinion is, and I don't know what Councilmember Clark thinks, that she's looking for meeting space. It doesn't have to be an expansion of the library. If we could move up the community center, which is already part of the park's plan, that's why I asked for the information. Like, what is the dollar amount? We don't need to move up the whole $46 million to move up the timeline on a community center. I feel like it would be wiser to do it that way, so deliver something that's already part of the plan, than add a room onto the library and maybe even delay the community center, which is obviously something that's already in our plan. So as long as I think we accomplish the goal of getting more meeting space into the Yucca District, I think it's a win-win for everybody. I would personally rather do it that way than add a room onto the library. I'd rather start working on how do we move up the community center. So I think the first step to that is to understanding how much money are we talking about for a community center. So, and Mr. Burke said he would get that for us. So I don't know that we're looking for, if we are looking for a consensus for expanding the library, I would rather take a look at moving up the community center myself and delivering another amenity to the residents. It's also going to fill an existing need.
Vice Mayor,
Go ahead.
I have no objection as to how the action is achieved. I would suggest that we do it in the most affordable manner possible so that it can be accomplished relatively soon. If that means a community center, which I imagine would cost far more than an expansion, then so be it. If an expansion is warranted, either way, and I don't want to give the impression that it's just meeting space for Yucca District meetings. I'm talking about the Heroes Library hosts a lot of activities, and there's no space. Space is very limited for those activities, whether it's something for teens or youngsters or adults. The space is too small to accommodate more than a handful of people. Thank you.
Okay, can we proceed?
Thank you, Vice Mayor, members of the council. So we'll move on to individual project and the details, starting with fiscal year 22, grounds and irrigation. This is the remainder of that long, big line that we broke down into individual projects. This was the money that was carried forward from the current year. We'll be working to expend most of this to try to do development of standards for irrigation. So as we do projects in the near future, they'll already have the principal engineering guidelines in place for how we'll do it. So everything moving forward would be consistent. The next one is lighting. It's the same.
Whoa, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm looking at page 103, which lists all the capital improvement programs. Where does park ground and irrigation? Is it a new project? 19032. And yet it's not listed. You know, you have general government, parks, construction, government facilities, yada, yada. But it's not listed on that summary by funding source,
Mayor,
which I think it should be, or would, I don't know.
Mayor, or Vice Mayor, members of the council, the one that is by funding source is more of a high level by funding source, but the pages after that show by project. So I believe it's on page 99 if Mr. Friedline is, if I'm reading his lips correctly. Third one down on page 99.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
The second one is the park lighting, which is the same principle. It was the large lump sum. We broke it out into individual projects. This is money that was in the current fiscal year. We're working with field operations to assure we have standards and a way forward for our lighting projects for LED lighting, which the council's talked about at previous workshops, and looking at possibility of solar and maybe some other delivery methods so we can do modern lighting in our parks, really improve the safety and efficiency, and improve the service level.
Vice Mayor,
Yes?
another curious question. There's 12 million in carryover. Do you propose expending all of this carryover that's listed starting on page 99 in this coming fiscal year?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, we're working right now to expend a lot of that, and those are in the projects that the council created that were additional revenue in the current year. So there's about 12 different projects we're working on. The current carryover estimate that staff put together is just where we are today. So we still have the remainder of this fiscal year to let some contracts with designers, let some contracts with some contractors. So a big chunk of it will be spent, not every dollar. And then as we move into the new fiscal year 22, we'll spend the remainder of that.
Okay, so you're telling me that by the end of the current fiscal year, by July 1, you will have expended most of that $12 million? Correct?
Probably not most, maybe about half.
Okay.
The reason
Well,
I hedge is the $5 million project for the community centers. We're in design and programming, and that's the lagging of all of them, so we may not have all that 5 spent.
okay, so half of that
ma'am.
carryover approximately will be expended by the end of the fiscal year. And then you anticipate expending the other half, hypothetically, the other $6 million in fiscal year 2022?
That is correct.
So you already have identified projects that will consume that money, or will it be in addition to the projects that are already listed?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, there are projects that the council's already reviewed in a workshop and directed us to begin working on.
I guess just for my edification, I would appreciate it if you could give me an idea of, not now, but in an email or whatever, of how you plan on expending that $6 million that you said you figured you could spend before the end of this year, and what generally you anticipate using the following $6 million for.
Mr.
Just
Vice
to
Mayor-
refresh my memory.
Mr. Vice Mayor,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark, again, the 12 million are projects the council has already directed staff to expend. The reason why we're saying we won't necessarily expend it all in this budget year is just because of some of the delay to scope out and to get things under contract. But for example, if we're not fully built out on our 3 community centers, we still fully intend to fulfill the wishes of the council to complete those projects as quickly as possible, which may mean it may carry over into the next fiscal year. But the $12 million projects you're seeing here, we were given direction by the council, including irrigation, lighting, all the things you're seeing here. So it's just a matter of timing for how long it takes to put those projects and complete them.
Thank you, and I do understand that. I just want to get a sense of what's doable by the end of this year and what you plan on doing with this additional $6 million in fiscal year 2022. Thank you. It's just to refresh my memory. I know these are all approved projects. I'm not disputing that, nor am I questioning that. It's just in terms of dollars and cents. I'd like to see how the money is being expended. Thank you.
Councilmember Tomacha?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So I just want to, I'm trying to understand, because this confused me over the weekend. I'm looking at page 103, and I'm referring back to last year's park summary by funding source page, And in last year's binder, it showed fiscal year 2022, under Parks Construction, $17,383,410. And on page 103, it shows Parks Construction, $6,213,358. And then in fiscal year 2023, for last year, it showed $13,052,763. And for 2023, $11,276,115. So I'm not sure, there's been some changes, I'm not sure what those are. Has the money been moved somewhere else or moved, because I don't see it even moved back. The out years is still $46,400,000. So I'm confused by that. And then last year you didn't have general government capital project, you didn't show a carryover. So I'm just curious why the amount of money available in Parks Construction for fiscal year 2022 is a lot less than what was showing for fiscal year 2022 in last year's book.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, the first 3 pages under that tab show you the changes from year to year. Otherwise, we'd have to go through project by project. We'd be happy to meet with you separately on that, council member, if you need some additional information. That's not something we'd be able to answer at this moment, not to that level of detail.
Well, I tried figuring it out going project by project, but I mean, there's a big difference. It's $11 million less. And I mean, the changes are project by project, and I didn't see anything that added up to, unless maybe did you move that, is that carryover? I'm just trying to understand the math in the book. I couldn't figure it out. You don't have to answer me today, but I'm just wondering why the amount has been reduced by so much and where the money went. You can get that to me later.
Okay.
The next project is the O'Neill Splash Pad, which is a project the council's directed us to work on. It is under construction, and this is identified as potential carryover for that project. Next is the park infrastructure improvement. This is still the large placeholder. These are projects that have not been identified and drilled down in individual projects. We skipped it out 1 year to fiscal 23 through 26, and there's the $40 million, and this is projects that would require additional voter approval. Heroes Lake, original park, the lake project, this $4.2 million in fiscal 22 is general funded bonds, and the project is designed. It's out for bid right now. We anticipate construction beginning, I believe, in April and be completed by the end of the calendar year. And then the build out we've talked about, which is the $46,400,000 and as a placeholder, and we'll get you some additional information on that. This is where we begin the new projects we're recommending for the fiscal year 22. Rose Lane Park improvements. Of course, it's in the Cactus District, and we're recommending improvements to the irrigation system in that park, resurfacing courts, and a new play structure. Bonsall Park, which is in the Ocotillo District. And again, we're recommending in fiscal 22 irrigation upgrades, court resurfacing, and new play structures. Como Park improvement in the Saguaro District in fiscal 22, irrigation, court resurfacing, and a new play structure. And Mondo Park, which is in the Barrel District, fiscal 22, upgrade the lighting and new play structures. And moving into fiscal 23, Mary Silva Park is recommended. It's also in the Cactus District. New lighting, new playground structures. Hidden Meadows Park in the Saguaro District. New lighting and new playground structures. Heritage Park, which is in the Barrel District, court resurfacing, and new playground structures. And, excuse me, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, when I say new playground structures, please assume that as we do new apparatus, we are also planning on shading all of them. So it also includes a shade structure at each location, and that's in those costs. In fiscal '23, Hillcrest Park in the Choya District, recommended new lighting and a new play structure.
Vice Mayor, I just wanted to quickly ask, when you talk about, are you also talking about removing sand and replacing it with a different ground cover and those, or would that be a different project? The parks that do still have
Vice Mayor, members of council,
sand?
that's an excellent question. We would be taking out the sand, and our current recommendation is using the bar, which is the shredded wood that is ADA accessible and is easier to refill and keep in place.
Okay, so Vice Mayor, if I could, that's part of the replacing the playground structures?
Yes, it's
Okay,
included.
all right, thank you.
Moving into fiscal '24, New World Park is in the Cactus District. Improved park lighting and a new playground structure. Mission Park, also in the Cactus District. Park lighting and a new playground structure. O'Neill Park improvements in the Ocotillo District. Lighting and court resurfacing in fiscal '24. Montara Park in the Barrel District. Improved lighting, court resurfacing, and new playground structure in fiscal '24. Carmel Park in the Choya District. Lighting, irrigation, court resurfacing, and playground structures. Moving into fiscal '25, Delicious Park in the Cactus District, playground and shade structures. Lions Park in the Ocotillo District, lighting and new play structures. 25 also in the Saguaro District is Country Gables Park, lighting and new playground structures. Sunnyside Park in the Barrel District, lighting and playground structures. Carrington Park, also in the Barrel District, park lighting and playground structures. 25, a project in the Foothills Park in the Choya District, lighting and playground. And that includes, Mr. Vice Mayor and members of council, that is also the sports lighting upgrade in that one park, because there's such a, we think, such a need up there for new ball field lighting. 25, also Northern Horizon Park in the Ocotillo District, lighting, irrigation, and playground. Myrtle Park in fiscal '26 in the Ocotillo District, lighting. Clavelito Park, also in the Ocotillo District in '26, lighting and playground. Butler Park in the Barrel District in '26, park lighting and new playground. Joya Park, also in the Barrel District, park lighting and new playground. Sierra Verde Park in the Choya District in '26, lighting, court resurfacing, and new playground.
Vice Mayor,
Yes.
so for the next 6 years, you saw no need to improve any park in the Yucca District?
We have different funding sources and different projects that we're not presenting today. We're doing the general obligation bonds. I believe we do have projects in the Yucca District. The next section is cultural, but the one after that is open space. There's major projects there. And then infrastructure projects, or development impact fee, we call them here. And
What would be the funding source for parks? Are you talking about DIF monies for any improvements in the Yucca District?
I believe there's a DIF project identified for doing additional amenities at Heroes Park, and I believe in open space bonds, we'll get to in a moment.
Well,
there's
that's the Grand Canal,
Pardon me?
correct? Is that the Grand Canal?
That'd be the Grand Canal, yes.
Okay, but individual parks, nothing for Discovery Park or Pasadena Park or any other park in the district
In
for
our
this
in our
program?
current recommendation, those are the newest parks, the most recently developed, so we felt like, although they probably need some improvements, they could wait while we do some of these others that are developed in the 60s and 70s.
Okay, Discovery was established, I believe, about 15, 18 years ago. But it doesn't need anything, is what you're telling me, correct? Pasadena is older than that. Pasadena Park was established in the 80s, but it doesn't need anything, you're telling me. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark, I don't think we're saying that the parks you just mentioned don't need anything. I think what staff has done is, because we have a lot of parks that were now 50, 60 years old, that they just kind of, the needs were more glaring. So for example, when you look at irrigation, you know, we have a much higher probability of failing irrigation systems that are expensive to repair and use a lot of water, that would how we would prioritize. But it's not saying at all that there aren't parks in your district that could use additional improvements. At the end of the day, and I think all of you know this city went better part of a decade without having the resources to put into our park system, and now we're kind of paying, you know, we're trying to play catch up, and there's just a lot of need throughout the area, and this was just staff recommendations for what we felt were the highest need areas demonstrated by our assessment and other feedback.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I understand that, and I appreciate your comments, but I find it totally amazing that there are no needs in the Yucca District. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, right.
Just a question regarding does this max out the general obligation bonds within the park's capacity?
Mayor, members of the council, I think it's very close. It may not be to the exact dollar, and that's part of the analysis that will continue to be done.
Okay, so
That was our goal.
if we did, for example, if the bonds had passed last year, this would have changed this, would that have changed this significantly, or was that mostly just pushing the Heroes Park up?
Vice Mayor, members of council, I think it would have changed significantly, because we're doing just the highest priority at each of these park sites. The playgrounds, which we think is above ground, heavily used by the community, something that council recognizes, a demand for, we recognize, and an opportunity to show the community we're doing something that they can see. A lot of these parks still need work that would be underground, invisible, whether it's sewer lines, water lines, irrigation, power utilities. And if we put all our initial investment there and they didn't see any improvements, I didn't think it would ring as well. There's a lot of amenities that are still not being addressed at every single one of these parks that we called out today. There's still ADA sidewalks, in some parks restroom buildings, in some parks courts that need to be rebuilt as well as refenced. So there's a lot of capital need here that isn't addressed that would have been if that bond had passed and we had the ability to do a much bigger program.
Okay, yeah, and I know council may consider going out for that bond again, and I think that will change significantly the ability to meet some of the other needs in the other districts. I mean, my district, I look at my parks, and we have a lot of parks. I have the largest park, which is the Paseo Wash, basically, as far as acreage, yet we haven't done anything to it. But I understand, you know, once we get some bond money, perhaps, and if we get an approval for bond money, then we can move forward on making those improvements. And I think that is really, you know, something I think we should consider doing again, making sure we have a good communication. And I think we can push up many of these projects that aren't getting done if we can get that bond through. Thank you.
Okay.
Jim, give me a minute to forward the slides.
With that, we'll move into the cultural facilities general obligation bond funded CIP projects. The remaining voter authorization in the cultural facilities is about 13.4 million. It was part of the 1999 ballot proposition. And projects that qualify for cultural facility bonds are for planning and constructing a cultural facility, planning, acquiring, repairing, and restoring historic properties, and acquiring land and interest therein as may be needed for such facilities and purposes. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Burke.
Thank you. In fiscal '22, we have one project in this category, which is Squirrel Ranch. It's identified as the master plan. I think our recommendation as our priority for this is to hire an engineer to look at the drainage in the historic area of the park. Because of we didn't have any rain last year, but the year before in the fall, we had a couple of big storms. And water went into the basements and affected potentially the substructure of those buildings. The tenants and the partners in the park told us that. So we'd like to bring an engineer to do that. I'd also like to get an architect to assess each of the buildings and look at the structure, the maintenance and repair required, the deferred maintenance of all the historic structures in that part of the park, and then we come back to you with individual projects and cost. Because I think it's going to be a potentially a very significant number. But this is also a project that's in this fiscal year and is identified as a carryover. We're working with the engineering department to try to get those consultant contracts right now. Any questions?
Vice Mayor?
Councilmember Tomachay?
Thank you. I have a question about cultural facilities, and this is something that I actually intended to bring up when we were discussing parks, is the amphitheater, the renovation of the amphitheater. I'm wondering, can that be moved out of parks, and would it qualify for cultural facilities, the redoing of the amphitheater, or even economic development, and free up this capacity within parks? I'm just curious if we can move that. I mean, I would think that an amphitheater qualifies as a cultural facility, but I don't know the answer to that for sure.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, we can have our bond attorney take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
With that, we'll move into the open space and trails general obligation bond funded CIP projects. The remaining voter authorization in open space and trails is approximately 50 million. It was part of the 1999 ballot proposition. And it's for planning and acquiring land and interest therein for preservation of open space, planning, acquiring, and constructing multi-use trails and linear parks, including but not limited to lighted walkways, play areas, benches, amphitheater, artwork, fountains, landscaping, and equestrian trails, and acquiring land and interest therein as may be needed for such facilities and purposes. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Burke.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, in this slide, we have identified 4 projects that will require council approval within the existing voter approval, and I'll go through them individually. Thunderbird Conservation Park, we have 2 projects identified, even though it shows 3 fiscal years. So starting in fiscal '22, $1 million to design, and our recommendation is the new trailhead and identifying access part, driveway, restrooms, interpretive facilities, actual parking itself, and trailhead connections. And our recommendation would be the 55th Avenue and Pinnacle Peak trailhead, which seems to be the busiest one, to build a permanent trailhead there. And then in fiscal '27 through '31 is the balance, the $6.6 million. As we get farther into this program, what we'd recommend is pulling some of the money out of that and doing a trailhead improvement over at 63rd Avenue, or 67th, I'm sorry, I've forgotten, across from the high school, and then looking at the 59th Avenue also, coming back with details with you to do the same things, to do driveways, gates, entrance, signage, restrooms, interpretation, pavement, and trailhead connection.
Councilmember Tomachay?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. Does this include paving the parking lot at 55th Avenue rather than continuously applying that Gorilla Snot. I get a lot of complaints about the dust from that parking. It's a busy parking lot.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, yeah, absolutely. It's a brand-new trailhead. We recommend a complete new design, and we'll have some detail at a future workshop.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead.
can you give me the approximate dates without my having to go through the book, for when you anticipate doing the Skunk Creek linear trail improvements, what fiscal year, Grand Canal and Thunderbird Paseo?
I didn't hear, excuse me, Vice
Yeah,
Mayor,
what
I didn't hear the
fiscal
first part of the
year,
question.
what fiscal year within the CIP program between 22 and 31 do you tentatively anticipate doing Skunk Creek, Grand Canal, and Thunderbird Paseo?
My next 3 slides, I believe, will answer that question for you.
Thank you.
Yes. Vice Mayor, members of the council, so Skunk Creek Linear Trail, we've identified $1 million in fiscal '25. This is in 2 council districts. It's in the Cholla district, from the city limits coming through Foothills Park, and then it goes into the Saguaro district till it exits the city into the city of Peoria. We have a bike path there. It's a hard surface path. It's well used, very popular, but the landscaping and irrigation have completely been deferred maintenance for so long that they're almost not there anymore at all. We get a lot of complaints. A lot of our Glendale 1 issues are for improvements or lack of improvements in the maintenance along that path. And to re-beautify and recreate that is our proposal. The next one is the Grand Canal Linear Park. And in fiscal year '23, we've recommended $1 million. And in fiscal '24, $4 million. And that is to look at the infrastructure and the amenities, but primarily that irrigation system. Vice Mayor, members of the council, I think Councilman Clark and I have discussed a number of times the old design and the lack of redundancy, and when something fails in that system, it's basically a 7-mile loop, and then your whole thing's shut down. And we have failing grass and failing trees, and you get a lot of complaints. So this would tackle that project first, and then move through the amenity list and look at things like ramadas and the splash pad that's not working anymore, and bring it back to the potential that that park has.
Vice Mayor, what fencing are we talking about in Grand Canal?
I'm sorry.
Where's the fencing located?
Yeah, I'm not recollecting that off the top of my head. I'll have to go back to our
Yeah.
detail sheet. It's probably just some boundary fencing separating
All
us
right.
from existing.
And I guess I'm really dumb. Where's the splash pad?
I didn't even know we had one either, but we call it, I believe,
We don't have a splash pad.
we don't have one that's working, but there's one that was designed and built and is sitting out there at the Missouri Park at the very beginning of it. I believe it's
Okay,
71st Avenue, 73rd Avenue.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. And then the final one is the Thunderbird Paseo Park in the Saguaro District. In fiscal '24, $1 million to start the design, and then in fiscal '25, $4.1 million to do improvements. We want to look at all the nodes on that park and the landscaping, the signage, the parking lots, and the improvements, but also investigate whether or not there's other potential there for recreational amenities to expand what's happening in those areas. And with that, I believe that completes my presentation.
Vice Mayor, I do
Yes.
have one question. We have a lot of voter bond authorization in cultural facilities. I don't remember the exact amount. I would have to go back to that sheet. Wouldn't the amphitheater be considered a cultural amenity? And why couldn't it, maybe somebody asked this already. It was asked, and what was the answer?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, we'll have our bond attorney take a look at that.
Thank you.
That's it. Are any questions?
Okay, so with that, we'll move into the government facilities general obligation bond funded CIP projects. Government facility voter authorization has a remaining authorization of about $23.7 million. It was part of the 1999 ballot proposition, and it's for planning and constructing a new public works operations center, acquiring or constructing additional city buildings and facilities, planning, acquiring, or constructing a tourism visitor center, additional restrooms, and related infrastructure throughout the city, and acquiring land and interest therein as may be needed for such facilities and purposes. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Watenko.
Vice Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
one question that I would like addressed that both Councilmember Choff and I have championed for years now. It may be a while before we get any kind of formal visitor center. Again, I would ask why we can't develop some kind of temporary visitor kiosk located at City Hall, maybe in the Breezeway area, I don't know. But as a temporary measure until such time as we can develop a full-blown visitor center. We keep asking if this can be considered. Does someone have an answer to that question?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, I'll have to go back. I don't recall getting direction from the council to install a temporary center. We can certainly look at that in pretty short order. We just need to decide, I need probably some definition of what that would look like. Is it a staffed facility? I know we had talked about perhaps allowing putting a person in the entranceway to the building and allowing them to help be like an ombudsman and answer questions there, but we haven't budgeted for that. But we can certainly get some more detail on that.
Councilmember Tomacha?
Finished. I actually don't have them with me, but it was in the minutes multiple times during last year's budget and CIP discussions. It might have been referred to more as a customer service type endeavor, but, and I actually in the minutes also said that I was disappointed that it wasn't included in last year's budget and would have to think long and hard about approving a budget this year that doesn't include that. Thank you.
You can proceed.
Hey, good morning, Vice Mayor and council members. So these three projects listed here are program projects within the existing voter authority. Before we go into any detail, though, please remember that the operations campus we discussed last week, the $9 million shows the prior council direction, and it has not been updated since that workshop last week. We still owe you a further refinement on that and breakdown by funding source. So what would go to the enterprise funds and what wouldn't. I'll talk more about these projects in a minute. This slide shows program projects that staff is recommending for council approval this year that fit within existing voter authority. These are 4 new projects, and I'll discuss each of these in a moment. This slide shows program projects in fiscal years 26 through 31 that do require council approval and would also require additional voter authority. With that, now I'll discuss each individual project. So this is the prior Glendale Operations Campus. This has not been updated since our February 9th council workshop, and as agreed to, will be updated and include a cost allocation model, and that will be shared with council.
Councilmember Tomacha?
Vice Mayor, because it would have been nice to have an email, because the workshop actually was February 2nd, not February 9th. It was 2 weeks ago today, and it's showing no change. So I was confused because the change document doesn't show any changes, but it's still showing $27 million and $9 million general obligation authority. So this change document isn't current either, or it's current on everything other than the ops campus?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, everything is current with the exception of the Glendale Operations Campus, but I believe the presentation on the Operations Campus itself was on the 9th.
Okay, that's right. But so all of these other figures are correct except for where it shows all the ops campus, it says no change, but the rest of this is all correct? Has all
Vice
been
Mayor,
updated?
members of the council, yes, that is correct.
All right, thank you.
So the next project is the underground storage tank replacement project. This is for the operations campus only. All the other underground storage tanks were recently upgraded with the aid of grant funding. This site did not qualify, and it's in fiscal year '24 and does have existing voter authorization. The next project is a City Hall building remodel. This has not been updated to reflect council consensus in December when we did a special workshop and viewed Terminal 3 at Sky Harbor. An award of contract should be before council in March for the vision and updated based upon that work. And this project then would also consider and include a customer service center, kind of a one-stop shop, which may be what Councilmember Clark was referring to earlier, with an ombudsman option, that type of thing. And again, we'll be coming back to council with more details on this as we get into the programming phase and the visioning.
Vice Mayor,
Yes.
since this is a project that runs from design in fiscal year '22 through fiscal year '26, it could be up to 5 years before we would see a customer service center. I would respectfully ask that it be included in the earlier years, that portion of whatever the city hall. Then there's no need for a temporary kiosk if you're going to do it within a reasonable amount of time. But to wait another 5 years for some kind of visitor center is I think, inappropriate. Thank you.
Okay.
This next project is the adult center renovation. This also has not changed from last year. However, we do have funding that council has allocated to this project via the AZ Cares to accelerate the programming. The results of the programming will be reflected in changes to this project. This is one of the new projects staff is recommending this year. This is to replace an elevator at City Hall. Replacement of this elevator will ensure that we are maintaining our current assets in good working condition. As part of the replacement of this elevator, we would ensure that we follow the direction of the future of the City Hall exterior project. This is another new project that staff is recommending this year. This is replacement of the City Hall fire system. This is not replacement of the individual nodes out within the building. This is replacement of the panel. The main panel and any work completed during this project would not need to be redone during any future City Hall replacement or remodel project. This next project is also a staff recommendation to move these roof repairs forward. This is for repairing and replacing roofs at the operations campus, buildings A, B, and O and P, not building F. That was a clerical error on our part. And then the airport maintenance building and the Bead Museum. This next project is for repairs, structural repairs to the City Hall parking garage. We're attempting to do these before they become larger and require replacement of the parking garage to keep the garage in good working condition. And I do apologize, the justification is incorrect for this project, and we'll make sure that that's corrected for you.
Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Turner.
Thank you. Regarding the City Hall parking garage, I noticed that it mentioned roofs, which now you've told us is incorrect, which is understandable, fine. But is there any interest in providing a cover over the uppermost deck of the parking garage to provide shaded parking up there and potentially even solar energy return?
Vice Mayor and council members, Councilmember Turner, this project did not look at that. That would be an enhancement to it. This was just the structural repairs to it. If there is direction from council to consider that, we could look at the City Hall exterior project as what it might take to add that in.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, I would support that request. I'm surprised we didn't do it a long time ago. that third upper level of the parking structure should be shaded, and what better place to stick solar and perhaps reduce some of our electric costs that way. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, this next project is one that would require further approval for. It's scheduled in fiscal year -- this is the amphitheater renovations. We did hear the comments regarding cultural bonds, and we'll look at that. But we're also going to examine this as part of the City Hall exterior project, with the visioning and the programming of that.
Mayor?
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. It may not be discussed here as being part of this project or funding because of the funding source, but do we have any, this is scheduled out for fiscal year '26. Do we have any project in place to upgrade the sound and lighting or anything at all at the amphitheater at this time? Or are we don't have any intention of spending any money on it until '26? I thought there was some discussion about, at one point, about stuff we could do, smaller stuff we could do now that would make it better, more artist-friendly, I guess. Because using this amphitheater is something that I think this council has wanted to have more of ever since I've been on it, and yet it continues to lag. And I realize part of that's COVID. We do have this music program we're trying to start, but I'm just wondering, is there any upgrade in the lighting or sound that is planned before '26?
City Manager?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Turner, I think that that's certainly a discussion that can happen. We are going to be bringing back and having a discussion during our operation budget about perhaps investing in the amphitheater and making it as part of a broader campus remodel. I think that would be, at least make that decision first. If it looks like the amphitheater doesn't, it doesn't have the support of the council to build in, then I think we can come back with a plan for improving sound and light. But I think if you're going to do it from scratch, you should just rebuild it from scratch and actually have an engineer design a sound system and lighting system for the amphitheater. But nothing says we can't spend money in the interim on that. We just need to identify a source on that.
Vice Mayor? Yeah, excuse me, pardon me. The city manager is absolutely correct. We still have a lengthy budget process to go. But because COVID came through here and ended all of our events, we really need to know what our event strategy is going forward before we see a significant change in the amphitheater, even some of those that suggested by Councilmember Turner. But I look forward to those conversations, but I think we should wait to see what we're going to do in the future post-COVID for events. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
You're welcome.
Vice Mayor. Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Talmadge should go, then you.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. General fund capital repair arena, there was a change, funding added to fiscal years '22 through '26, and there's a lengthy explanation. There's no slide, so I don't know what what's anticipated for the out years, but I know we've been discussing making some significant investment in the arena, especially since the other arena in this region has had significant money invested into it. But I don't even see I don't mean slide. In my book, there's no page for the arena. So I'm just curious why that is.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Talmadge, that's scheduled for our next workshop. That's under the pay-as-you-go capital. Today's presentation is on general obligation bonds, the GO bonds. So that's scheduled for in 2 weeks.
So is that going to be another binder, or how is that going to, or is that going to be added to this, or how are we going to keep track of all this?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, you'll have the same binder that you have now. We're just going to go through the rest of the projects within the book that you have.
Okay, thank you. And so, Vice Mayor, if I could, Camelback Ranch will also be part of pay-as-you-go, and I imagine you're working on the requests coming from the management over there?
Vice Mayor, council members, Hollenshoff, you are correct. It'll
Thank
be
you.
in 2 weeks.
Councilmember Clark?
Yes, in response to Councilmember Aldama's comments regarding the amphitheater, I think now with the underutilization of the amphitheater, it couldn't be a better time to actually look at it and see what could be done to upgrade it, quite frankly. And it's kind of like that old saying, build it and they will come. We've run during the summer band concerts in there for years, and they're always full. I can't imagine that if we added more programming to the amphitheater that it would be underutilized. I'm sure that it would be overutilized. So I consider the amphitheater project a priority at this point, especially considering that with COVID, no one is covying up anywhere, and it makes it a perfect time, although I don't imagine the city can operate that quickly, but it certainly would be nice if it could be done during COVID season. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
That concludes our presentation. The next workshop, which will be our third workshop on capital improvement plan, is on March 2nd. We'll be discussing pay-as-you-go capital projects, transportation sales tax, highway user revenue fund, DIF, and grant-funded CIP projects.
Are y'all wrapped up?
Vice Mayor, yes, we are
Great.
done.
Council have any further questions or comments? Councilmember Tomachoff?
Thank you. So I just want to make sure, so are we going to be getting more pages for the book? Because are all the projects already in here, or there's going to be stuff added that we're going to need to add to these books?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, we did notice that there are some missing pages. Yes, we will send them to you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No further business. Meeting's adjourned.